Welcome back everyone, this is Photography Lounge bringing you a new video about two cameras that I call my autofocus cameras. Now, the camera that's actually filming this, by the way, I'm not a videographer, so this is a little bit difficult for me, but the camera that's filming this right now is a GFX. And I often call my newest camera, my newest autofocus camera, the GFX. It's actually the XH1, and next to it is my favorite of all time digital only camera, the SL from Leica. The reason why I love the Leica is because it feels like an SLR. And I don't mean big and bulky. I mean it grips like an SLR. Its body is tough as bloody hell. It balances on two fingers like this because the grip isn't only large, it comes at almost a perpendicular angle to the body, meaning that you can balance it with one finger. A lot of cameras that have good grips or are purported to have good grips don't allow you to do that, and you end up having to grab both the back and the top in order to make it work. But the SL balances perfectly, almost like a Nikon D200. I think after the D200 the grip went downhill. The D800 was so poorly angled that you couldn't grip it properly, or it wouldn't balance on fingers like this. Now, the good thing is that unlike the XT2 and the XT1, the XH1 also balances just like that. It's a proper grip. It's not quite as solid as the SLs. And in fact, the whole camera itself isn't as solid. It's a hell of a lot lighter though, of course, because it's magnesium body alloy, where the SL is, as far as I understand, a huge ingot of aluminium, hollowed out, however they do it, and made into this solid chunk here. The problem with the SL, of course, is that it has, I'm joking, it's not that heavy, has pretty harsh lines here that when you have this thing on a strap and it's bumping along your back, can end up bumping into your bones and can be kind of painful. This is a problem that I think Leica could have avoided had they made softer lines. The XH1, on the other hand, has some indents here, and the edges are softer overall. This goes for all the bottom edges, and even the top. The grip itself is molded slightly for your fingers, which I think is actually quite nice. And at the top here, it has a little thumb groove. So you can grip it pretty solidly. In fact, you can wobble it like this and it's very strong. Now, when you do that with the XH1, a lot of things shake. It's like inside. The whole thing is wobbling. I think that a lot of people talk about how Fujifilm lenses are high quality and premium, but this is the 16 to 55, they're 2.8, they're high-end lens, and to be very honest, I think it feels like a kit lens from when I had the D200, and the kit lens was the 18 to 70. The difference, of course, is the 18 to 70 was a plastic lens and this is metal, but the same style of zoom action, where not only does it make a lot of air sound, but as you go in and out, the lens actually wobbles quite a bit on its own helicoid. And the manual focus ring, not only is it decoupled just like the Leica SLs is and fly-by-wire, but it feels pretty damn cheap. Further, the aperture ring, as you know if you've already used this, is really loud and clicky. It's not nice and softly clicky like a lot of Viewfinders. The Viewfinder, I'm trying to think, my favorite one's a 35 1.7 Ultra, the new one, beautiful lens. Now the Leica, of course, lacks aperture ring, but when you shake it, the only sounds you get are kind of like some dull chunks here and there. And of course the lens itself has optical stabilization inside. And when you ratchet it in and out, not only is it heavy like a proper Canon or Nikon 24 to 70, it feels really solid. And the focus ring feels very similar to one of those, except of course you don't feel the gears that are attached to the motor. So in terms of body feel, it's not exactly a draw. The Leica feels better in the hand, but the Fujifilm on a strap feels better on the back, because when it bangs into your body, it doesn't bang those hard metal edges. Of course, the grip is a lot better on that, I think, at least, a lot better on the Leica, and the shutter button, dear God, the shutter button. There's nothing around the shutter button. It's just a piece of metal, actually metal, not plastic, that pops through a metal chassis. When you press down, it's very clear where the half or focus confirm is. You go like that. And because the body itself is extremely solid, even a hard click barely moves the body at all. And I think what Fujifilm were trying to do with the X-H1 is to remove the sort of half stop so that when you press down, it doesn't shake the body at all. The problem I have with the X-H1 is that the shutter button is too touchy. A half press, which I'm getting used to now, may feel like a full press. So there's no hard stop in between to tell you that the shutter is halfway down. It's very, very sensitive. My wife's thin lady fingers accidentally pressed the shutter hundreds of times perhaps because it was in CH, which is continue high speed, which is like 10 or 11 frames per second. And so after about a half a day of shooting, she had taken maybe 100 images that she didn't mean to. It's too touchy. If you have gloves, even bicycling gloves, and certainly ice gloves, you won't notice that you've pressed it all the way down. This is, I think, all things considered, a mistake. The reason is because the camera otherwise feels pretty good in the hand with gloves. One of the problems I have with the X-H1 is that the shutter button is too touchy. There's no real stop to tell you what is half pressed and what is full pressed. If you have naked fingers on and you're used to it, you can just press it so that you know it's not going to take a shutter exposure. But it's not much different than a full shutter exposure. My wife's fingers, which are thin and ladylike, ended up taking hundreds of inadvertent exposures that she didn't mean to because she couldn't tell when the shutter was pressed, and she has a very light touch. The Leica SLs, on the other hand, is properly half stopped here. Press it half. Even through gloves, I can tell that the shutter is going to just either focus or pre-focus or take AEL exposure. And then, all the way down, great feedback. But the X-H1's shutter is quiet. Here, I'm going to take this up to the microphone. The Leica's is, it's my prejudice that I prefer the sound of the SLR, of the SLs, and actually so does my wife and so does a friend of mine. But in a quiet room, this is definitely going to make less noise. So it's kind of give and take there. But again, if you're wearing gloves, if you're outside, if you just want to whip out the camera and go and make sure you're not taking exposures that you don't mean to take, the SL is better for that. Another reason is, if you look at the backs of the cameras, one is cluttered up with buttons, another is not. The SL's buttons are all programmable. In fact, you can even program the shutter speed to go back here where I prefer to use the aperture control. And every single one of these buttons, you can combine a long press or a short press to make a function of your choice. Generally, the short presses are hardware fixed to do a specific function, and then the long press is what you can customize. But there's nothing to accidentally press. And I have been in the middle of, was it -23 to -27 weather in Canada back over Christmas, and with ice gloves on, and had no problem operating any function on the Leica. Not a single one. Again, with this Fujifilm, even changing small things such as metering or focus points is a little bit difficult even with bicycling gloves. Still, I think the Fujifilm is overall a better design compared to the Sony A7R and the A7 III, which I got to check out at CP Plus 2018. The Sony I would pick up, and even with my bare fingers here, there was no space between the grip and the mount. Whereas with the Fujifilm, you can see there's at least a centimeter, perhaps 1.5 centimeters between the two. So if you have thick gloves on, you can still operate the camera roughly. Another thing I like about the Fujifilm is that the OLED screen is brighter and easier to see when you've got the camera up to your eye. And I have glasses, of course, so that removes my eye from the back of the camera quite a bit. So the OLED, which is more contrasty and actually a little bit brighter and certainly adjusts itself better for the outside and for the inside than the Leica SLs, is easier for me to use. Think about a room in the evening where you have a reading lamp on. Someone's reading a book. In that lighting situation, the Leica SLs EVF will return a stuttery feedback. Maybe, I don't know, 15 to 20 frames per second. And it will drop even lower than that if it gets a little bit darker. The Fujifilm will keep a pretty smooth, not completely smooth, but it will be a pretty smooth panning action all the way. Even to think about, you go into a washroom at night and there's no lights on at all. There might be a street lamp outside. And even then, it's probably 20 frames per second. So that's dark. But when you go to single point autofocus and you want to focus on a single thing in a totally dark room, like for instance, my studio upstairs, there's no lights coming in because the complete blinds are on, and the only light in the room is the glow of a DAC, my Lynx Hilo, which is a screen about this size, and there's some stuff in front of it, including the actual screen. If I want to focus on the screen, the Leica is faster than the Fujifilm to acquire focus, even in the same single point settings or similar. And then whatever's reflecting, let's say a C-stand, way over in the left-hand corner, which even with my eye I can barely see, and the Leica, which is darker through the EVF than the Fujifilm, I can put it up to my eye and it will focus. Not fast, but fast enough. And the Fujifilm will hunt and hunt and hunt and finally find it. Maybe. It's the weirdest thing. Overall, I found that the Fujifilm's focus is, at least in AFC, more reliable, for sure, than the Leica's. But in AFS, the Leica's is faster in almost every single situation. But if you're looking to do actual action, you want to follow your kids, you want to follow sports, the Leica's autofocus system is not as reliable. Here, in case, I think a lot of you haven't really picked up on this, but the SL, to take out the battery, there's a little lever here. You just pop it like that. The battery does not fall out until you press in. And you can only insert it one way. Foolproof in the field. Every single Fujifilm camera and Sony, and even some of the Leica, like the Leica M10, the battery can be reverse inserted, and with a couple of problems. But see, there's a little latch here. It doesn't pop out until you press the lock. It inserts technically one way, but I can then put it in this way. It just won't lock. I can put it in this way. It won't lock. I can put it in this way. It won't lock. But if you are blind inserting this or have gloves on, it's a hell of a deal, actually. I'd like to look at the back of the cameras here just for a moment, and I just would like to compare a couple of things. One being the interface card door between the two. Card doors, sorry. The SL's pops open like this. You need to put firm pressure in. It doesn't just slide. Even if you press pretty hard, you press in a little bit and then slide forward. You can do this with gloves. You can do this naked fingers. It doesn't pop open easily like some cameras did. Certainly like the XT1, which is slid open like nothing, and it was made poorly. But you can slide it. You can even change cards pretty easily if you have gloves on. Not thick ice gloves, you'll have a problem. You should definitely take your glove off before you do that. The XH1s pops open with a fingernail, like this. The door itself is thin, but generally well damped here against the spring. And well, actually, if you were to open this and something were to hit this thing would for sure probably break a lot faster. This thing is on the SL is braced backwards by the body, and this one, the hinge is so far out from the body that if you were to hit this, it would be easy for this to break off. But it's still pretty solid. And the cards themselves are protected by this gasket here, which is a pressure gasket. When the body closes like this, the pressure from the body and the latch then sandwiches the cards into the rubber so that essentially water shouldn't get in. It's not foolproof. The Leica's ends up being putting the cards jutted out slightly into this cavity, and then here there's a rubber it's a rubber rectangle that then slides over the cards, and then it's pressured together. Now, I'm not an engineer, but it is my opinion that this one is slightly better. I don't think either one is foolproof. On this side, we have the interface doors for the USB, HDMI, and that sort of thing. And on the Leica, we have a more traditional DSLR style piece of rubber. The rubber pulls out on rubber hinges. And it's not thick. It's not super thick like it was on the D800. I think the D800's interface card protector is about as good as it gets for one of these gripless cameras. But this is second only to that. The ports themselves are protected by channels on either side and on the top and the bottom, into which the grooves of this interface door then press into. And the seams here, as you press them in, are tight enough that water shouldn't go in. But even if the water goes in, because of the channels and then the secondary layer of rubber on the inside, then keeps the water away. I mean, this is as good as it gets. The XT1, again, XH1, sorry, opens with a fingernail, and the door itself is thin, similar to the SLs, actually a little bit thinner, but it's hard plastic. And there's channels also around the interfaces, but they're maybe about as deep. But this door here, because it's not rubber, it's not quite as sort of vacuum style of a seal. It's more of just there's a bit of plastic here to keep out the water. And I think it's probably decent. I think if you're in the rain, you should probably have no problems. I think that if you're hit by a wave repeatedly, that the SLs would be more reliable to keep water out than the XH1s. But I'm not a surf shooter, and even if I was, it could be that I would find that this would be perfectly fine. Again, though, I think one of the complaints about the SL is that it is too expensive, and in my opinion, I think that they are charging maybe not too much for the camera, but they're targeting a market that doesn't necessarily exist. It's a $5,500 camera, a little bit more here in Japan, and while it's made certainly as well as any mirrorless camera, better than any mirrorless camera on the market by a long shot, I don't think people who are generally buying mirrorless cameras at the price range are really into the sort of the build quality. They say they are. People always are on about build quality, but then they talk about lenses that clunk and that have really cheap action like this does, like a kit lens, after talking about how they just love the build quality because it's metal. Just because something's metal doesn't mean that it's high build quality. And we even have the Sony A9, which is just $1,000 cheaper than the SL. Much better autofocus. But it is made far worse. The card doors themselves are much worse than XH1s, and you can see that probably if you spat hard enough, you could get water in there. So the SL is competing against a market that doesn't really appear to care about a perfectly sealed camera, or indeed that good of build quality. So I think that it really is competing against itself, and I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. It would be much better if this camera came out at a price point the SL to the Sony A9, and if it had a more reliable autofocus system and a whole bunch of better accessory options and flash, etc. I think it would be the camera really that turned the market toward Leica. It is not. Leica do not have the flash system. Fujifilm's flash system, way more accessories. You have everyone from Godot to companies I can't even name, and now Profoto, and I think also Broncolor, etc. With Leica, you have just Leica branded stuff, or you can go non-TTL for everyone. And that's a big problem, of course, for pros. Of all my concerns of the SL, it does really come down to price and accessories. I don't think, again, that it's priced out of its league for what it's built, but again, it's not marketed to a market that really cares about build quality. Because if a person handled an SL after saying that they think the XT1 or the XH1 or the Sony A9 are made well, and they don't recognize the difference, they're not going to recognize build quality if it hits them in the face. The EVF housing also sticks out a bit. My nose doesn't touch a screen. Same thing with the Leica SL. Both really good constructions on the two. The Leica SL has an integrated diopter control into the eyepiece, where the Fujifilm's is over here. This one's a lot easier to use. Again, with gloves, you won't be able to use that. There's just no way. And when I mean gloves, I'm Canadian, so I mean gloves. You go out into the ice, you go out when it's minus 20 something. The gloves that you would use will not be able to change the diopter on this. They will on this. This lens here, which is I think $1,200, it's a good lens, very sharp, great against flare, focuses pretty quickly. These are painted on. They don't have channels. This has a channel here, but they're painted on. And again, when you shake it, it's like click, 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 click. Leicas, these are actually laser engraved, all of it. Laser engraved, both have gaskets on the bottom, both have metal threads. The Leicas has a much more firm zoom feel to it than the Fujifilms, and not as much play. The Fujifilms, you can feel the lens sort of play at the ends, or when you go like this. And the focus system is the focus ring is a lot firmer on the Leica as well. One of the beautiful things about Leica is they design their own fonts for their lenses, whereas Fujifilm appear to rely on some sort of Arial or Helvetica sort of general thing that you might see in a newspaper on anyone's website. So it's kind of a shame. They really could have gone all out and designed a really handsome lens. I think Leica really did. One thing I much prefer about the Fujifilm camera is the lugs. The traditional eye lugs, you can just pop in any old strap that has a metal ring on it and it goes in easy. And as long as you have some sort of shielding around that, it won't scar the body. Whereas the Leica uses the lugs similar to the Canon, the larger Canon cameras, which are these sort of long, let's move that a little bit farther back, sorry. These long things where the strap goes directly into it. As you can see, this one was damaged. I'm not sure actually how. I don't generally keep the camera safe in sort of a case or anything like that. I just pop it into the back of my car when I'm going to take it to an event to shoot. And sometimes I put it in a bag. My guess is that a sea sand or something fell on it and it bashed it in here. Now, had that happened to the Fujifilm, I don't know what would happen. I can imagine that whatever damage that would move this really, really solid lug, it would have damaged any camera. But again, this is a Leica, meaning that if you want to get a repair, it's going to cost more. And two, this is the biggest problem with Leica if you're a professional. Where are you going to get your repair? Where can you get repair on a Leica? If you live in Tokyo, you're very lucky. You can go and get your rangefinder adjusted. You can also, and it can be done the same day in about an hour or 3 hours, depending on how many people are there to check out or to fix their rangefinders. But the SL cannot be serviced here. It has to be probably sent back to Germany. And this is not something worth it to service because the thing is still super solid. It's not budging, it just got bent. But yeah, I mean, if something goes wrong, if you hurt your camera or if there's some sort of electronic malfunction that can't be fixed in field, Fujifilm's support, while it's not good, it's not as good, sorry, as a Canon or Nikon, or even say Sony in some places, is there for you. And with the Leica, that's just not the case. It's not the case at all. Finally, again, another point, just to prove how, again, professional I am or am not. Let's look at the focus nipples, or joysticks, as some people call them. The Fujifilms is this tiny little thing here. It's a bit of plastic that pops out of the body. Now, it gives good enough feedback with gloves. Not with proper gloves, it kind of ends up disappearing into the fabric, so you can't really change focus that easily. However, it gives good enough feedback that you can use it in just about any weather. The Leica gives a really large focus nub here, which there's just no way to miss it, even if you have the thickest gloves of all. Its blessing and its curse is the fact that it focuses as well as selects focus. So right now it's in zone focus. I can move it all around the back of the body. Well, actually, sorry, most of the screen here. And then I press it, and then it focuses on something. So it's also the AF button. The curse part of this is, while it's easy to move around and then select, it's also easy to accidentally, as you're selecting, you end up pressing it in at the wrong portion. It's not a big problem because you get used to it very easily, but it can create some problems. I haven't had a problem with it, but theoretically, it's not the best design. The Fujifilm X100, sorry, you shift it around the same way. To be honest, it's a lot harder to shift because it's smaller and it's really fiddly. I suppose if you have tiny little fingers like a baby, it's perfectly fine, but then it's hard-edged and you can't just do it with the tip of your thumb very easily. And then the autofocus on is the button above. The problem with this autofocus on is that, as you can see, the body goes flat here, it's flush here to the back, and then suddenly it dips in like this. And it's also a little bit of a reach, and it's extremely close to the AEL button. If you have gloves on, it's easier to hit the AEL button than the AF. And in fact, it's easier to accidentally hit both of them at the same time. The Leica, even the biggest gloves, there's just no way you're going to hit anything else but this button. It's foolproof again, which is just the most bizarre thing. It's the most bizarre thing that this Leica that costs so bloody much and you can't get service for and doesn't have the best AFC focus ends up being the one that is designed for all the functions and all the situations where you would like to take the XT1 or the XH1 or bloody hell, whatever this one is called, I always forget, XH1, where the XH1 is technically has a better autofocus and has a better service, etc., but it's harder to use. So what I really would like would be this body. I would like Sony or Fujifilm to make this body, this size, with some rounded corners on the bottom, and put their electronics in it. I think that Leica could do better than Panasonic, although Panasonic have done a really good job on the electronics, but somebody has to make a body this quality, this easy to handle, with the sparse functionality, sorry, not sparse functionality, incredible functionality this camera has, but with a sparse and easy, simple, foolproof method to interact with it, no matter what gloves or not gloves you have on in whatever weather you have on. It's just, there's nothing like the SL. Unfortunately, there's also nothing like owning a Leica because there's just too many other things to think about that end up being possibly problematic. So that is my experience between the two cameras. The top-mounted displays on both the Hex H1 and the SL are really good. The one I prefer to use is the XH1s, and the reason is because it's e-ink. In all sorts of light, at least daylight for sure, it's visible. Even the brightest sunlight, it's as visible almost as printed ink. And perhaps I think it's supposed to be e-ink or something like it, so it's extremely helpful. On the SL, this thing always is lit up, and when you're in the dark, it's wonderful, although it can sometimes be too bright for things around you, and can light up things around it, things that are right around the camera a little bit, which I don't think is very, very good, but it works very well. It's also a lot less cluttered. You can see that the biggest display here is the shutter speed. Underneath that is the ISO, how many shots are left, and the mode the camera's in. Both of them are really functional because this one is customizable and because you can change it from black to white. One thing I really want to show that annoys me about the Fujifilm is that if you want to change your shutter speed, now all of you know this, you all own or have used Fujifilms, that's the reason you're watching this video. If you want to change the shutter speed to 6,000, you can't do it on the shutter speed dial. It only goes in full stops. Here's how you adjust the aperture, at least how I've got it set up. But the shutter speed goes 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 20 minutes, bulb, 30 minutes. I can go 30 minutes on that without using a subdial or anything. It's all on this, all the way up to half stops, full stops, maybe third stops, I don't know how far it goes. I can go all the way up to its top or minimal shutter speed on a single dial. On the Fujifilm, if I want to go half stops, I have to then use this unlabeled dial on the bottom, which again is hard to use if you have gloves on. So I understand why people are happy about this, but you turn off your camera, you're like, oh, hey, my camera is on 1/1/8000. Cool, I already know my shutter speed, it's great. No, you don't. It could be on anything from, as I've got it set on, to 1/5000 to 8000. There's a big difference there. So all the third stops, all the half stops are controlled on an unlabeled subdial. Now, if you're happy with that, you know, God bless you. I'm not. I love the fact that on the Leica SL, all the mechanical speeds and all the electronic speeds, as well as half stops and third stops, are controlled on the same dial all the way down to 30 minutes. Now, of course, you can shift the Fujifilm into T, which will let you select every single shutter speed, but then again you have to use the subdial. And the subdial, again with gloves, is hard to use. It's not as responsive as well. And to be very bloody honest, it's just frustrating. It is just frustrating because it looks like it's supposed to be a fully functional shutter dial, but it requires 2 or 3 different functional controls in order to do what the Leica does in a single control. So again, the Leica SL is the best design body I've ever used. As you can tell, by the way, the Fujifilm I haven't even used today. It was a brand fresh new battery. It's just been on for the sake of this conversation, which I've recorded. It's like way too long, of course, it's like 30 minutes or whatever. And with all the takes, I've probably been doing this for about an hour. And I haven't even shot it, and the battery is down to 2 out of 5 bars, and the Leica's is down to 2 out of 4 bars. This one was used previously, so both don't have good battery life, but the XH ones is actually pretty disappointing. But another thing you can tell from this angle is both are somewhat beefy cameras. The Leica SL is, at least without the grip, thinner in the top body than the XH1, but both represent what I think is kind of, at least for usable functionality, especially when you have gloves on, or you do a lot of outside work, or you have to make quick orientation changes, and you want to hold the camera firmly. Both are really well designed for that. So I wouldn't want a mirrorless camera that I would use across a whole variety of situations to be smaller than the XH1. I would again prefer a camera the size of the SL, maybe with magnesium so it's lighter. But yeah, both pretty decent designs, but the SL is perfectly designed and the Fujifilm is just good. But anyway, people have been asking me to sort of show at least visual comparison between the two cameras, and I'm very happy to do that. I'm sorry that I'm not a professional video reviewer, and I'm sorry that this video is maybe perhaps a little bit long as well, and that because I stutter here and there, and there's probably jump cuts, that this is not the sort of quality that you would think from, or sorry, that you would like of a video like this. But I'm doing my best, and I really hope that this is helpful to you.